Well, is it a House bill coming through, or?
No, it's a fiscal item. The 10 of us are going to be asked to approve $15 million to give to for-profit business.
Based on some of our past votes, I'd say probably if they wanted it to pass, they probably ought to let us know what it's about.
Maybe we should demand something in return.
Food for the next Senate session.
New parking garage in Rochester. I'll even donate the
Wait a
land.
minute, I think we just gave you a court.
Well,
CTE before that, right?
It could be. Rochester's been doing all right these days.
and I fight hard for Rochester, but, we could use the parking garage. I mean,
So can
Go ahead and build it.
So can Milford.
Warren doesn't
Whoa.
need one.
We argue for 2 hours, trying to make one parking space on the oval.
Yeah.
And our oval is a Main Street
The,
winner, so
when you
has
look at,
Rochester got that?
when you look at the transition that Portsmouth has had in their downtown, and how Dover is mimicking some of that, and it is now starting to happen in Rochester, where people who are building apartments are getting more and more interested in, places like the downtown in Rochester, to build apartments. So,
I was just up in your neighborhood last week. My wife is going to tooth implant. She's been going to Aspen Dental in Epping, and then they canceled for us. Like, we were on our way over there, and they called and said, "Oh no, we can't do it today."
but if you go up to Rochester,
Yes.
right
And
near,
that was actually the first next scheduled opportunity. I think that was on the 6th. So yeah, we went up to Rochester. We eventually found it. GPS led me along.
well, GPS may have given you the old location.
Took me off in 16. It had me make a right-hand turn instead of a left-hand turn toward the mall. Fortunately, I had already actually gone online, and I saw the picture.
Yeah.
I knew it was in the mall. I knew it was next to
Lowe's, Kohl's.
it's in the same thing.
Good morning, and I am. Good morning, and welcome to our special fiscal committee meeting today to talk about the items that were tabled, as well as a briefing on the annual comprehensive financial report. And I am especially looking forward to that. I think that we'll be pleasantly surprised from all that I have read. So, FIS 21-357 was withdrawn by Gopher, and so we will not be discussing that. The next one is FIS 21-365.
Madam Chair, I would move to remove 365 from the table.
Do I have a second? I will second that. Okay, thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. Okay, could we have the folks that are, oh, yes, I guess we do.
357?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Can I-
365.
Okay. Those in favor of removing FIS 21-365 from the table, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 7 to 3.
Thank you.
All right, the item is removed. Thank you. Okay. When we tabled this, we had asked, we didn't feel that we had sufficient information to understand what we were actually planning to do with this money. So Denise submitted to us a very excellent list of all of the items that Vital Records collects and the RSAs that we as a body have passed to require that collection. So, and so I guess that, are there additional questions that anyone has regarding this particular FIS? Okay. Since there are no additional questions, oh, you do. Okay, go ahead.
It's not really a question, thank you, Madam Chair. It's a comment. I just want the members to know I've received approval to file a late bill for a study committee to look at the amount of birth information that goes from the hospitals and the mother to the Secretary of State. And that bill is in the process of being signed off on, so that we will have an opportunity to discuss it, and that my 3 co-sponsors sit on this committee.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Senator Gaida?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the HHS contingent, I'm of the understanding that some years ago, Vital Records was housed in HHS and then was subsequently moved to the Department of State. Can you share some light on, yes, that's true, and if so, why, or why that move took place?
I'll start with that. Thank you, Senator Gaida. And for the record, Patricia Tilley, Director of Public Health. Thank you for that question. So I was but a baby when that happened. It was a long time ago in the early 2000s that moved over. So I wasn't privy to the information at that time. But at one point, it was housed within HHS and worked closely with all of our informatics, like Vital Records is housed in almost every other state in the country within a Department of Health. I think my colleagues from Secretary of State might have some additional information about the rationale for that move.
And I was not prepared to answer that. I didn't know we were going to go into the history of the move, so I can get back to the committee with the findings. But one of the things that I would like to say is that many times vital records is looked at as vital statistics and health statistics, but that's very, it is a big part of what we do, but it's also not only what we do. And so records are held under the Secretary of State, many records for this state. And coming from the town clerk, so I worked as a town clerk in the town clerk's office for 32 years in the town of Guilford. And I know the Town Clerks Association was behind the move so that the focus could be on the vital records portion of it, because we do a lot of servicing of other state agencies, the general public, and we're involved with immigration. It goes much deeper than public health, and so I think I could put together some information for you based on what we do.
And if I could just follow up, that we have worked in partnership since that change, and we've had both in statute, there's a partnership listed out, but just collegially, we work in partnership every single day. We can't, in the Department of Health, do our work without vital statistics.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So is there any formal MOU or?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so
This-
that's defined then. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any further questions? Representative Edwards?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We heard some testimony about vital records being a division of Secretary of State a couple months ago in this committee. I don't recall exactly how formal the data requests are from when DHHS asks for access to vital records data. But I remember the impression that there's essentially a firewall between vital records and the public health people, and that firewall has some formal procedures to get beyond it and get access to the data. Would you please remind the committee of the formality of which it takes somebody in public health to get access to vital records data for a particular study?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Representative. I don't know if, I was trying to follow your question, if you want to follow the data from Department of State to public health, or you just want to understand a little bit of how in public health we determine that.
To clarify the question, I'm curious about the formality of which the public health people ask for access to vital statistics data. So I'm imagining in the old world we would do a form that would have all the data we wanted access to with a description of why we wanted it, and that it would go over to vital statistics so that they could independently assure that that was a valid request. I'm wondering about the formality at which we get access to data.
So we have a formal data governance and data stewardship process that we use to identify who should have access to that data. The vital records data sits within through our MOU, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Denise, through that MOU, the data moves from Secretary of State's office into the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's housed within our EBI, warehouse, our data warehouse, which is what I used to call it. It sits within that data warehouse. And then for an individual DHHS staff member to have access to that data warehouse, they need to have a particular role. So again, we have a governance and a stewardship program, so they may have a particular role that allows them, or if they need it for a specific purpose, that gets worked through our governance process. Behind me, I have Chawai Chawla, who is the head of our informatics section, and she takes the lead role in protecting that data so that only those who have authorized access can get it.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator Rosenwald, sorry.
Thank you. Could you clarify for us, please, if the Division of Vital Records or Statistics is either a HIPAA-covered entity or has a signed HIPAA business associate contract with the Department of Health and Human Services?
I think our MOU does say that we will have a HIPAA, that we all meet HIPAA requirements. It is part of our MOU.
I'm sorry, is it a HIPAA business associate contract
misunderstanding.
also.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, the Department of Health and Human Services is a covered entity and has that, and so when we, through our MOU, all of our work has to be within that environment. And
But
under-
my question was about the Division of Vital Records, not Department of Health and Human Services.
I'm not understanding the question, I'm sorry.
Perhaps we could rephrase it to say that she didn't know? Okay. Representative Gray.
I know that we meet HIPAA requirements, if that's what the question is.
Well, and that's where I was going, is that in statute, there are strict requirements on who can get certain data. Being a genealogist, I cannot get data from anyone who isn't 75 in the population records and older than that, if it's not this or
If
that or
it's not
the
an
other
open
thing.
record.
Could you just summarize some of the policies that you have? Maybe that would satisfy Senator Rosenwald and so that she would understand.
So are you asking about the general public being able to see certain documentations? Are you talking about staff members in
To
general?
clarify my
just a minute.
question, if I could, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
please.
It's who has access, okay? And is that access identifiable down to an individual or, you know, those kind of things are the things that are protected by HIPAA. And, you know, certainly I'm sure that the Senator wants, you know, assurance that, that we're not violating HIPAA even though we may not have it somewhere.
Thank you. I think Catherine Cheney's here from our IT department, and she can probably explain the tracking and the different things that we have within our software system. And not everybody in the department has access to everything. It depends on their role. If that's what you're looking for, Catherine can
Yeah,
explain that.
what I'm hearing is that there needs to be clarification on the, specifically what I'm hearing is medical information in regards to personally identifying information, and is that information available to other people? I've also heard that, do we have a HIPAA compliant person or some type of assigned business HIPAA compliant person on staff? Those are the two things that I've heard. The first question is that our data is like what Tricia had said, that is protected by roles. We have roles in our system, and that is one of the stellar upgrades of the system, is that only certain people can see these records within our own departments. And then every day, these records, specifically the ones we're talking about for DHHS, the death and birth records, are put into the data warehouse where they have access to all the information. The externally facing files, Never in Files, Never in Web, specifically are used for statistics, and only numbers are put into that system. And for genealogy, that would be part of the research area in a different area. You wouldn't use any of our system files. So anything that's externally facing is non-identifiable, just mostly numbers. And then we do not have, I don't think we have a HIPAA compliant person on staff. I do know we have a nosologist, and we are one of the few states lucky enough to have a nosologist who can code causes of death and understands what that really is.
And again, not each staff member has access to everything. It is role-based, very similar to DHHS, where it's based on the individual's need, based on their work. So, for instance, if somebody's working just in death and they don't have any need to be in birth, we identify it through approval through the director, and also they're role-based in the computer system to begin with, so they can't get to certain items.
Thank you. Senator Gaida?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the nexus, or the condensed version of the question is the Department of State Division of Vital Records required, either through the MOU or an associate business agreement, to be compliant with Hipaa?
Yes, we are compliant with HIPAA.
Thank you.
We are required with everything that we do.
Okay, are there any further questions? Representative Edwards.
If you'll allow, I have a question for Senator Rosenwald. May I ask her a question?
Will
Okay.
you accept a question?
So I'm a co-sponsor on your bill. So I'm just curious, since you brought it up, how does the fact that that bill has been submitted, does that influence your view on whether we should approve or disapprove this request today?
No.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll? Oh, yes, I need a motion. Senator D'Alessandro moves. Do I have a second?
$365, motion to approve. Representative Edwards.
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Erf.
No.
Representative Wallner. Yes. Senator Daniels.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Rosenwald.
No.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Yes.
Representative Umberger.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the vote is 8 yes, 2 no.
With the vote being 8 in favor and 2 opposed, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We now turn to FIS 321-371. This is a request from the Department of Health and Human Services. It is currently tabled. Okay. I have a motion from Representative Wallner and a second from Representative Rosenwald. Okay. Welcome back. Are there any questions for HHS on this FIS?
Sorry, Madam Chair, you just have to take a motion on removing it from the table.
Pardon?
You just need to take the vote.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you for keeping me straight. Okay. All those in favor of taking this off the table, please raise your hand. 7 in favor and 3 opposed. Okay. Are there any questions for HHS on this FIS 321-371? Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just have just a general concern that I think has been consistent over several meetings now, and that is that in the previous budget year, we underfunded, I think arguably underfunded IT enhancements. And this budget term, with the state money and the federal money, we've opened up a massive spigot of cash to go towards IT. And what I would like to see at some point is a summary by the department, a portfolio analysis of all of the projects going on, all of the people that need to be hired or who have been hired, so that we have a sense that in the aggregate, this money that we're allocating in eaches is in the portfolio level being responsibly managed. And I suspect it is, but it's not an answer for today. It's a heads up that I've asked HHS oversight to make it an agenda item. So you've got a couple months, but I really am lost in the portfolio, not seeing the portfolio as we approve these eaches.
Okay, we can figure out a way to do that. What I would mention is I don't believe there's an IT project associated with this item.
I'm sorry, I'm seeing data modernization. Am I on the wrong one? Yeah, I am on the wrong one. All right, so I was on the wrong one, and that was really embarrassing.
That's okay, it happens.
It's okay.
But,
You had us reading it as well.
yeah, but my comment was generic enough that I think you'll still run with it. Thank you.
Understood, thank you.
Okay, are there any further questions? Seeing none, I will, okay, thank you. Thank you for keeping me out of trouble. Do I have a second? Okay, and Representative Wallner seconds. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes. On 371, Representative Edwards.
Yes?
Clerk votes yes. Representative Erf.
No.
Representative Wallner. Senator Daniels.
No.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
No.
Senator Rosenwald.
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro. Yes. Representative Umberger.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the vote is 7 yes, 3 no.
The vote being 7 in favor and 3 opposed, FIS 21-371 is approved. Thank you very much. We now move to FIS 21-389.
Madam Chair, I would move to remove it from the table.
Second.
Okay. Removed from the table by Representative Emmerich and seconded by Representative Erf. Are there questions from the committee?
Madam Chair, just a motion on removing.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay, thank you. I keep forgetting that. Okay, all those in favor of removing 21-389 from the table, please raise your hand. Looks like 9-1. Is that correct? You're opposed? Okay. Votes 9-1. The item is removed from the table. Now I will try. Are there any questions from the committee on this FIS 21-389? Representative Wallner?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think you need, yeah, bring it a little closer.
Sorry.
Thank you. Mhm.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I was not here in December, so I wasn't here when the item was tabled, but I would like to understand better if you're having a hard time hiring and you have vacancies, explain to me about why you don't have excess money in your budget at this point to pay for hiring people. And just a little bit follow up on that. It's hard right now to hire people for any job. So I'd like to understand a little more about where you think we're going to find these people and where this agency will find them, and why is it only a 7-month contract?
So I will answer the first question and then turn it over to the Commissioner, Director Ribsum. So Karen Rounds, Chief Financial Officer, DHHS. So I did distribute to the LBA the state fiscal year 22 budget, which also included 19, 20, and 21 at the bottom. And I hope that that was distributed to the committee. The total budget appropriated for SYSC was $10.4 million, which included general funds and other and federal funds. Part of what we budgeted for in fiscal year 22 and 23 was funds from the state of Vermont, because we do have a contract with them to take kids from the state of Vermont at SYSC. What we have found now, being 6 months through the year, which is when we typically are able to do the first set of reliable projections, is that the revenue from Vermont is going to be less. We're predicting about a little over $1 million less. And the way that the law is written we must write down the appropriation if we're not anticipating the revenue. So we are anticipating writing down by that $1 million or so, leaving us a budget of about $9.5 million. The expenditures so far this year are about $5.2 million. There's encumbrances that are a little over $500,000. We have spent about $277,000 in overtime of staff that are not employed by SYSC, so employed by elsewhere in DCYF. So we should transfer that expense to SYSC, which is about $277,000. There is a slight addition to the budget because of the raise that will happen on 7/1. We are anticipating having to make some additional payouts when people retire for about $56,000, leaving our expense projections for the rest of the year around $4.2 million. What I would also mention is in the expenditures already to date is $330,000 of retirement payouts from reductions in force that we did at the beginning of the fiscal year to meet this budget. So with that, we're expecting total expenditures to be $10.3 million, which you'll note is less than the total appropriation that was given for SYSC, but because of that revenue write-down, we actually have about an $800,000 shortfall in the SYSC budget. So in addition to these funds to support this contract, we will be coming back to the committee with a transferring funds from elsewhere in the department to cover that $800,000. So the budget is less than what was, total budget is less than what is appropriated, but because of that revenue write-down, we don't have enough funds in the budget.
So I can speak to why the contract is a short contract. This really is a bridge contract or a transition contract. We've talked now for several years about finding a replacement facility for SYSC, and I don't think there's ever been a time in the past where the department has been as committed as it is now to closing SYSC and moving those kids into a more clinical model. And it isn't just SYSC that we made that commitment to. If you recall, a couple of years ago, we committed to closing the Laconia DRF, which had been open for 30 years, and everyone said we could never close it, and we closed it in about a year. We're in the same place with SYSC, but between now and when we build, renovate, buy another building, we need to provide safe level of staffing for the kids. COVID has required us to open quarantine units. We have more kids on 2-to-1 and 1-to-1. All of these were unknown at the time that the budget was developed for SYSC. So it's caused an escalation in our personnel costs. We're not able to hire for a variety of reasons. This contractor has serviced other areas of the state, have been very successful in getting temporary workforce for other areas of DHHS and other areas of the state, so we're confident they'll be able to do it. So like I said, it's a bridge. We need transition time between making the commitment to close it and actually closing it, and we need to provide a safe environment in that time. If we're not able to provide a safe environment, there are alternatives. None of them are, excuse me, none of them are good for the kids. None of them are good for the state. That includes sending kids out of state, and I don't mean Massachusetts or Vermont. I'm talking far away out of state because they don't have beds either. Sending kids with mental health issues to emergency room boarding, which is not a great place to be right now because of COVID, and the hospitals are overwhelmed. So we're trying everything we can to care for these kids in place until we have that replacement facility up and ready to go.
Senator Guida, you have a question?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. So if we don't hire these people, will we have our kids going out of state?
If we don't find additional temporary staff or hire our own staff, which we haven't been successful in, there is a good possibility that if we continue to lose staff or our population goes up or becomes more acute, that we will either have to send kids out of state to a detention facility out of state, send them to the kids that have mental health issues, send them to the emergency room and have them board there. There will have to be other alternatives to care that are not in the best interest of the kids.
And if I can just add to that, that will also come with additional cost. So I would have to come back with an item to pay for that.
You have a follow-up?
Yes, Madam Chair. Are you able to quantify in fairly specific terms what the cost of one out-of-state placement is?
These high-level facilities tend to cost somewhere around $1,700 a day.
Would you mind stating your name for the
I'm
record,
sorry.
please?
Joe Ripsum, Director of DCYF. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald.
Just for comparison, what is our daily rate we were charging Vermont? Wasn't it like 1,600 a day?
I think it's about $1,700 a day. I think it might be just under.
So the cost to have a child at SYSC is about the same as sending them out of state?
It's comparable, but if you don't totally close down SYSC, you still have to manage an essential basic operation. And as we've spoken about in the past, one of the big challenges fiscally with SYSC is we've long gone below the census that makes the economies of scale make sense. We had a lot of conversations about that in this fall's committee to study the closure and replacement of SYSC. So sending kids out of state is unlikely to get every child out of SYSC. There aren't a lot of options out there right now. We're having difficulty placing kids out of state for other reasons, and there aren't local, like neighboring states that are willing to take these kids. So I'm not even sure that that's a viable option, but that would be the next thing we would try, and it would probably be worse for the kids that we have there now.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner, you said something that got me wondering. You mentioned that we're still trying to look at three basic options, renovate, remodel. I forget what the third one was, but that doesn't matter to my question. It leaves me with the impression that here we are in January, and a lot of people are expecting the solution to be available in April of next year, where that's very close. And so I would like to know from you two things: are you strategically leaning one way or another on how to do the replacement part on the Sununu closure? And what are the odds, in your opinion, of us having it done before the end of this budget year, June 30, 2023?
It's unlikely that we will close doors of SYSC prior to June 30 of 2023. I think that we will be well on our way to closing doors, like whether that's in construction for renovation or building. I think that will be well underway, but I don't know that we would be ready to close doors by June 2023. It just depends on construction schedules and things like that. We're still looking at the options for property, the restrictions on the land in Manchester. There's a lot of legal issues that are around those different items that we have to investigate before we come with for certain recommendations. Now, we formed a commission last summer that submitted a report to the Legislative Commission around our recommendations. The Legislative Commission then submitted their own recommendations around what they thought they would do. I think we're going to find what we end up doing to be somewhere a combination of both of those things. I'm not leaning one way or the other. I'm really waiting for legal to kind of really investigate what my options are on the different state properties, what we need legislatively to make a change, what we need budget-wise to make that change, to fund those projects. That's the phase it's in right now.
Follow-up? So it sounds like you all have to come back at some point to give us a budget proposal to get you all the way through the budget year, because I don't believe your budget was built to take you there. And I'm just curious when you might be coming back with what the real financial need is to get us through the budget term.
So, yeah, it's a difficult question to answer for sure, because we do have to have a sense of what the plan moving forward is to know what we might need. But I think it'll be next fiscal year before we come back, because we'll need to figure out where the Vermont funds are at that point. We'll need, the way that the appropriation was done for SYSC, it was just a lump sum appropriation, so we have to go through and figure out all the different class lines, what the employment looks like at that point, and then figure out how much we'll need for funds. So it won't be until the state fiscal year 23 begins.
Thank you.
Are there, Representative Daniel, or Senator Daniels, sorry.
Thank you. I think last we had heard reported from you there were only 1 or 2 youth from Vermont there. How many did we lose?
I think overall, we've had a total of 7 since the contract started over a year ago. At this point, we have 0. We've actually had to decline requests, 5 requests to take kids over the last couple months because our staffing situation was so tough that we couldn't handle additional youth within the facility.
Okay, so the reduction didn't take place all at once, is that correct?
I'm sorry.
You mentioned we've
So-
lost 7 over the last year.
No, it's not about losing them. So the way that the contract is written is that Vermont makes a request to us to take a child on their behalf. So it's not that we had 7 there and then it's slowly reduced. It's sort of a one-off situation. They call when they have a need. So what Director Ripsom is saying is that we've had 7 different children there since the contract began for varying periods of time, not for the entire period of time. And that since then, they've made additional requests, and we've not been able to meet their requests because of staffing.
Okay, so was the expectation in the revenue that you expected to get revenue from Vermont, but
Yeah, so our expectation was that we would have somewhere between 1 and 2 kids for the entire year.
okay. What is our population now?
Today's census is 14.
Okay.
I do have, I think Representative Umberger asked last time to get, a snapshot of what every week has looked like, so I could share that if folks are interested.
And I believe that when you went through the budget, you probably budgeted for 18. Is it?
No, we were budgeting thinking you'd have on average 12, because that's what our average daily census had been. But there's a difference in the needs of the kids that we're serving right now, particularly over the past 2 months, in that we've had a high number of high acuity kids who we've tried to move into high-level psychiatric residential treatment facilities or acute care facilities, but because those facilities are so overwhelmed, it takes a long time with a long time on a waiting list to get kids into those facilities. So kids who are very high need, that often require 2-to-1 supervision, are staying in SYSC for a longer period of time than they typically would, because the ability to move them on has been cut off by the children's mental health crisis nationwide.
So in the directions that we were given on trying to find a replacement for Sununu, we were told that you needed space for 18. Why would you budget for 12 when you're telling the committee that you needed space for 18?
Because the request for space for 18 was not just about having 18 beds, but having the flexibility for when kids go higher and when kids go lower. The census has varied between as low as 6 and as high as, I think, 16 over the past, 12 months. So you have flexibility, you have movement in there, and it changes every day, every week. You also have needs to separate children based on gender, based on court orders, based on their individual clinical needs. So when you have fixed space on a fixed unit, you can't necessarily use every single bed, right? If you have one unit that has 6 beds for 6 girls, but you only have 2 girls in the facility, and you have 8 girls and 8 boys in the facility, you're not able to maximize all of the building space. So the conversation around a new facility for 18 beds was largely related to the flexibility to meet the discrete needs of youth and have youth spread appropriately throughout the facility, not that we anticipated having the facility full at 18 at all times.
If I can just add to that, we also look to budget conservatively. So we budgeted on the average rather than the maximum. We could certainly budget on the maximum and then lapse more funds, but that's not, we try not to do that.
Okay, was I wrong in, I guess, assuming that you were budgeting for the worst-case scenario?
I mean, there are certainly times that I budget for the worst-case scenario because I'm expecting the worst-case scenario. In this case, it's based on trends, we felt pretty comfortable budgeting on the average.
Okay, and, you know, the similar question with your staffing level. What were you figuring on a ratio when you put the budget in?
So the main staff we're talking about here are the youth counselors, is the direct care staff. There's also a lot of other staff within the facility, which largely hit that economies of scale issue I was speaking about earlier. Whether you have 1 kid or 10 kids in the building, 12 kids in the building, 15 kids in the building, you need nurses, you need clinicians, you need mental health psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors that are coming in and out. You need all of those things regardless of the level of kids. But the youth counselors, which is what this request is about, is the one that's most dynamic. You typically need, if you don't have anything extraordinary happening, 1 youth counselor in SYSC to monitor central control. Without somebody sitting there to monitor central control, which has all the cameras and access and control over all the doors, there's no way for people to move through the building. So you need 1 youth counselor in that space. And typically you want 2 youth counselors on every open unit because you don't want one youth counselor with multiple kids. Just a high-risk situation to do that. Staff aren't comfortable. We don't think it's safe or appropriate. So you often typically would have 3 units open, 1 for girls, 2 for boys. Some with boys with higher level needs, boys who have court orders that have to be separated because they were involved in the same type, maybe in the same criminal activity, or they have, you know, issues with each other, or they're involved in different gangs or something like that, and you have to keep them separated. So you typically, on an average day with nothing extraordinary happening, need 7 youth counselors in the building to make the building run. This hasn't been an average time. Since the start of COVID, we typically have a young person who's sitting in our medical unit having a COVID test and awaiting results before they can be moved into the rest of the facility. When a young person's assigned to medical for any reason, a youth counselor has to sit with them in medical to make sure that they're safe and they're cared for. The nursing staff aren't appropriate to do that, and the nursing staff are running around the building taking care of everybody else in the building. Then, when you have situations like we've had particularly high levels of over the past month or so, where you have youth who have a 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 supervision, that incrementally adds the needs for more staff. We had a young person in there recently who had made multiple suicide attempts, required a 2-to-1 supervision for well over a month, even overnight, because the moment that youth was left alone, they would actively try to hurt themselves. And we needed to have people there to make sure that didn't happen. Those types of scenarios have been compounding towards the end of this, you know, current COVID period, with the mental health system unable to take these kids. And that's what's driving a lot of this. So the staffing that we require really to be safe to cover all of those shifts and that flexibility each day, depending on youth needs, is about 47 youth counselors in the building. That's what we're budgeted for. We currently have 30 working in the building, and I actually received notice from 3 more in the past few weeks that they're leaving.
Thank you.
Senator D'Alessandro?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Joe, just from my standpoint, I've read this last graph of the request, and it says the funds will be used to enter a contract with a healthcare staffing agency to provide 18 temporary staff for the period of 7 months. Given today's economy, where are you going to get a staffing agency, and what happens if you can't find them with a staffing agency? What does that leave us at this point in time?
So, and the commissioner could speak to this too, she has at Governor and Council, but the staffing agency that we already have GNC approval on the contract, but it's not funded, so it's not moved forward pending the action in this committee. That's with a staffing agency called Maxim, which has had a lot of success within the state. They've actually already identified a number of staff that are ready to start training next week. But it's pending the action of this committee.
One further question, Madam Chair.
Yes,
Now,
please.
but we're going to pay dearly for the staff, is that correct?
This is a request that is for a little over $800,000 in ARP funds to pay for the staffing contract. I think it's somewhere, the staffing agency is, you know, the total contract value is around $800,000 and change for 18 staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Rosenwald?
Thank you. I thought I was following this, but this request would bring you up to like 50 youth counselors, and we're budgeted for 47, so I don't understand, again now,
Yep.
why the money is not within the current appropriation.
We're budgeted for 47 youth counselors. We currently have about 30. 3 more have given their notice. This contract is for 18 because we were anticipating we'd still have turnover and dynamic situations with hiring our own staff. As CFO Rounds explained, the problems with the budget have to do with the declining revenue from the Vermont contract and the unexpected or unbudgeted payouts for staff that retired when we went through the last round of restructuring staff as a result of the budget cut at the start of this state fiscal year. We reduced 26 positions as a result of that. A lot of those staff, rather than be reassigned, chose to retire. And when staff retire from state service, they get a payout for their sick time, et cetera. That hit our budget, was not something that we were anticipating at the time that budget was crafted. So there's a couple things, and the high overtime usage. What I would hope is that if we're successful, if this contract works and we get folks in, that the overtime demand will go down drastically. You'll look in the budget that was distributed, there's a lot of overtime going out right now, which costs a lot more than even the staffing contract would. Typically, we're paying juvenile probation officers, and now we even have CPSWs going in there to work overtime because it's so desperate. And those folks are making a lot more than even the staffing agency is getting paid when they're working overtime hours.
Follow?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So given that the department is looking to move to more of a treatment-focused model with the new facility, and we are going to stop using the parole officers, hopefully, is the department or the division able to commit to training these temporary youth counselors in a more treatment-oriented model than we've gotten from parole officers?
Yeah, and we've already started that work, although it's not complete. We've started moving into a model called PBIS. At the moment, I'm not remembering what the acronym stands for, but our psychiatrist or psychologist that's working down there has started implementing that already. The idea is to start to move folks into the direction of being clinically oriented while we're in the process of moving towards a new facility. We also intend to relook at those SJDs, change training and education requirements and all of those things to make sure that those staff are actually the right staff to do this more clinically oriented, mental health oriented treatment that we expect of them. But that hasn't been the historical model, as you and many people know. So that's the transition phase we're in. The staff that come in, the temps that come in are going to be trained with the same things that we're training our current YCs on, which do include training of things like PBIS, de-escalation strategies and things like that to continue the movement towards a clinically based model, but that's, as I said, that's a work in progress.
Are there any further questions? Representative Wallner?
Thank you. So the $846,000 will pay, hopefully, you'll be able to recruit and pay 18 additional staff for 7 months. And that will cover, the $846,000 will cover their wages during that time.
Mm-hmm.
What if they only recruit 9? Let's say they are only able to recruit 9. Then will you expend only 400 and some odd thousand of the contract?
Yeah, the way the contract is structured, it's an hourly rate per hour worked by temp employee. So there's nothing paid if nobody works, and if everybody works every shift, it's the maximum.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, could I have a motion to accept?
I'll move the item.
Thank you, Senator Gaida.
Second.
Seconded by Representative Edwards. I did better that time. So, will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. On 371, Representative Edwards.
Yes.
Clerk votes yes. Representative Erf.
Yes.
Representative Wallner. Senator Daniels.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Gaida.
Yes.
Senator Rosenwald.
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Yes.
Representative Umberger.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the vote is 10-0.
I
Thank
hate
you.
to mention it, but Representative Emmerich, you said item 371, and it's actually item 389.
My apologies, 389. You're correct.
Okay.
Too much paperwork.
On a vote of 10 to 1, 21,389, 10 to 0. FIS 21,389 passes. And I thank you all for coming back and providing the additional information that you did to help us make a decision. So, okay. Maybe we could stand for a moment, maybe 5 minutes. And before we head on to our annual comprehensive financial report briefing, just give us a little, get rid of all those.
Is that a 5-minute recess?
Yeah, something. Good call.
Hang around the corner there. I gotta call Dr. Ballard back.
How are you, Charlie? I'm outstanding. How are you? Any trouble? Yeah. Somebody sent you an email. I think the vital records, just the stuff we already found, statistics, we identified, we have 12 stillbirths,
Maybe,
47 women
but
that
it's
were
the
pregnant.
same people.
Copy that MOU. Because the person asked a specific question, are they required to comply with Hipaa? Either through an MOU or with the business associate.
She didn't even know what a business associate
So
was.
that's gonna solve a lot of our problems.
Maybe.
I want to know how this full data transfer process works.
I think,
Probably in the MOU.
my fear is that
Okay, welcome all. I'm glad you had an opportunity to sit through our tabled items. And I'm on. And we are sincerely looking forward to the annual comprehensive financial report briefing. So, Commissioner Arlinghouse, would you like to?
Yep,
Okay.
I'll kick it off, Madam Chair.
All
Good
right.
morning, members of the committee. For the record, Steve Smith, LBA Audit Director. And as you know, we retain KPMG to do the state audit. And joining us from KPMG is Brock Romano, the partner, and Karen Farrell, who is the manager on the engagement this year. And then from the Department of Administrative Services, who actually prepares the report, Commissioner Arlinghouse and our State Controller, Dana Call. So with that, I will turn it over to Brock and Karen, and they can actually present their opinion and the results of the audit.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. It's good to be back in person again. And I'm glad, Madam Chair, you mentioned this as a briefing, because our intent is to purposely be high level, given the ocean of information that's contained in a 162-page document. We're prepared and happy to go into whatever level of detail the committee would like, but initially we'd like to make just some general high-level comments, and then management will kind of drill a little deeper into a couple elements of the report, but that is background. So whenever I meet with a governing body to discuss the report, I'd like to give a little bit of an overview of what KPMG is doing. So just as a refresher, KPMG does the audit of the annual comprehensive financial statement, which we're going to discuss today. In conjunction with that audit, we also issue a report on internal controls over financial reporting. I believe that's also in your package, and we'll touch briefly on that as well. That's mean, it shouldn't be. And if I were smart, I'd know how to fix this thing. Hang up on them. My apologies. I'm out of practice, as I've admitted before. So also KPMG New Hampshire hires us to do the separate audit of the Turnpike, and that'll be presented next week to the Fiscal Committee. And then, of course, we also do an audit of the state's federal programs, and that's something we would present to this committee later on this winter, early springtime. So with that, just getting into the annual comprehensive financial statements, and again, the headline for us is the audit opinion. I like to remind committee members in this 160-page document, there's one page that belongs to us, and that's our opinion. The rest of it belongs to management. And the headline there is that we are rendering unmodified opinions on the contents of the annual comprehensive financial statement. So we do our audit in a couple of, in accordance with professional standards, both from the AICPA as well as government auditing standards, because you do receive federal funding, and that's where we get that byproduct report on internal controls as well. In terms of other items in the report, the audit opinion that might be of notice, this year the state adopted a new government accounting standard board pronouncement on fiduciary activities. We noted it in our opinion, but for members of the committee, it really was not as impactful as maybe some other standards has been in the past. So we won't get into too much detail on that. And then, of course, we also perform limited procedures on some of the supplemental information included in the report, particularly over the budget statements that are in the back of the report, as well as the supplementary information on the status of your pension and OPEB plans, which is a personal favorite of mine. And if there's questions on there, I'd be happy to entertain them. I'm going to move off of the audit opinion for a minute and just briefly mention that separate report on internal controls over financial reporting. We have one item in there. We have been reporting the same item for the last couple years, related to the credit carryovers. I think that's a topic that we've discussed at length at previous committee meetings. Happy to go into detail today if the committee would like. I think the point here is that New Hampshire is not unique. Most of your businesses are making estimated payments, and as of a point in time, they are typically in a overpaid position, meaning they've paid more taxes than ultimately their returns are required. And then there's an accounting mechanism to determine whether you should recognize all of that as revenue or retain a portion as either unearned revenue or due back to the taxpayer. And so there's an academic exercise that we go through with DRA. And I think the good news is that number is kind of stabilized around $60 million for the last couple of years, but it is something that we've been discussing with management, and that is the sole item in our separate report on internal controls. So I'm going to pause here for a minute because I'll go on forever, and I'll ask Karen Farrell to kind of jump in and maybe go through some of the required communications that we typically go over when we meet with a governing body. I will warn you in advance that you are likely to hear this again when KPMG shows up next week to do the Turnpike presentation, but I do think it's important for us to make sure we communicate to you those items that are significant as it relates to our audit. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Okay, thanks, Brock. I think this one works. Does it?
I'm sorry. Representative Edwards has a question on the,
Credit carryover? Yes.
yes, credit
So,
carryover.
so I was just a finance major because GAAP scared me. But it says in the supplemental report that we think our best estimate is about $64 million in that neighborhood is money that taxpayers aren't necessarily aren't expected to apply to future tax payments. And then it says that 64 million is not considered to be a liability. And without getting into the green eye shades thing, it feels like a liability to me, and I'm just curious why, just management judgment, whether or not it's required by some rule, why we wouldn't just carry it as a liability if we think it really is.
Yeah, I might just make one comment and then turn it over to management. And maybe just to put a finer point on it, most of your taxpayers are calendar-based organizations, and so they are paying taxes based on a tax year. Most taxpayers who make estimated payments, me being one of them in my own personal life, oftentimes will overpay with the knowledge that it would be applied to the next quarterly payment. And so what happens is, as of the tax reporting year, they have made an overpayment, and then there's an analysis done. Then there's a separate analysis done to see how much of that overpayment would have been earned by the state by the end of your fiscal year. There are different points in time. So I would say that the taxpayer's intent is to leave that money on deposit to be used for future taxes. It just happens to cross fiscal years. So the accounting mechanism that we're highlighting is that there's an estimate of $64 million that really applies to the next fiscal year. And it's quite common, every state that I'm aware of kind of runs into this situation. The question is, should you record that money as revenue as of today, or should you kind of report that revenue in the next fiscal period when it technically will be earned? And so we're probably in a little green eye shade category, so I will pause and maybe invite.
As a follow-up, I think maybe you've shaken me enough to where I now reread the sentence. The state, however, does not record a CCO tax refund liability in its annual financial statements. And the preceding paragraph left me with the impression that we thought there was $64 million that would never be applied to any future tax payments. So I just misread the paragraph and sentence.
Good, Karen.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm going to go over is just a few uncorrected misstatements that we identified, and that is one. So I think that, just to kind of clarify a little when I get to that point, is that, I think KPMG believes it should be a liability as of June 30th, 21 of the 64 million. So we kind of include that in our analysis to see what would be material and whether we can pass on that entry not being recorded in the state's annual financial report. And we got there with that one entry and then a few others that I'll mention in a little bit. But, I think to answer your question, KPMG does believe that it should be a liability that's recorded at the end of the fiscal year, each year, and that's why it kind of keeps coming up in our discussions.
You want to talk about what we do here, and then I'll...
Good morning. Dana Call, State Comptroller. Yes, you will. This issue obviously has been ongoing for quite a while, and we've presented to Senate Finance in the past a similar finding. So this is a kind of a repeat finding for us. And we would agree that there is an accounting determination that's made, but there is also state legislative policy by you folks that it sort of conflicts in some scenarios. And this is one of those scenarios because this would directly affect general fund surplus. So if we were to record it, it would have a significant effect on the funding that you all use to create the state budget. So that has been one of the points that we've been discussing over the past several years. So I'll let Commissioner Allinghouse.
So one of the things, this is fun. One of the things that we've done over time, this has been an issue, and it becomes an issue when things bump up and when they bump down. And I think probably 2 or 3 major inflection points over the last, dozen years. I think probably the big presentation to fiscal was probably 4 or 5 years ago, before my time technically, and I've been commissioner 4.5 years. So when you consider this, think of the CAFR a bunch of different ways. One is that it's an accounting document. It's the state's major accounting document. It's our books. It's also a transparency document and an accountability document. And one of the things that's very important from a state standpoint is that we don't change how we account for things. We don't change what we do constantly so as to confuse anybody trying to look at it. If somebody wants to look at the state's finances and see how we're doing, they want to look at what we do. It's important that there be consistency over time to the extent that there can be. We do make changes when GASB, whoever GASB actually is, some obscure board hiding in Connecticut, but pronounces, GASB 80, and you'll have these discussions, GASB 78 is going to make us change everything. And it's OPEB calculations. A lot of those calculations have to do with how the state's books look. Are we carrying a $1.9 billion OPEB liability, or is it 2.1? And what are the components of that? And functionally, from a practical decision-making standpoint, those aren't really that different, even though it sounds like a lot of money. We've been doing this the same way for decades, from time immemorial, probably to the origin of the business profits tax. To change it would make a sudden budget change. Most of the accounting decisions we make do not suddenly take $60 or $70 million off the books and remove them from your ability to spend them or balance the books with them. And if we made a dramatic change, one of the reasons to not make a change is because it looks different and it makes things less comparable. Another is that we would suddenly say $65 million that you probably have and you should have and you probably will have because this averages out and washes out in the end. Suddenly you don't. And by the way, dear Fiscal Committee, could you write a check? This happens to be a year when you're awash with money, but it's very rare that that's the case. So it seemed like an obvious decision to not book it that way, even though KPMG thinks we should.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just make the last couple of points on this topic. So the opinion that I mentioned earlier on, that our opinion is your financial statements present fairly, contemplates this topic. So we still believe your financial statements are presented fairly, including this topic of discussion. The other point I would make is even though we refer to it as a liability, these funds are available to you. It's just the timing of when you would recognize them. So if you wanted to substitute unearned revenue as a proxy for accounts payable, because we're not suggesting you write a check necessarily back to the taxpayer. This is really just an accounting mechanism of when do you record that revenue. The funds will be available for you, right? Because you have them, they're in your possession, they can be spent, so the cash flow, none of this is affecting the cash flow, it's just affecting the timing of recording a tax revenue. And I'll probably stop there because eyes will glaze over if we've kind of gone into too much minutia, but.
I would just add to that while we have been talking about this for years, we have made some headway. You'll see in the response, the management response to the finding, that the legislature has chosen to take a look at analyzing the credit carryover liability and putting caps on it. And I'm a member of that commission should it ever start. But there is legislation in play and that has passed that is taking a look at that. So it's not that we're not ignoring the issue, and we've been actively working with the legislature to explain the issue with the Department of Revenue and try to address it, at least from a high level going forward, because it is a large number.
Thank you.
We're going to move on.
To some more mundane topics. Okay, so for the record, my name is Karen Farrell, and as Brock mentioned, under AICPA auditing standards, we're required to communicate certain items to those charged with governance, which is yourselves. So the first one being that we did not identify any significant unusual transactions, is that a little bit better, while performing the audit. Management, in compiling their annual financial statements, needs to make judgments about accounting estimates like the tax receivables or the OPEB obligation, and we deem these to be reasonable in all material respects in relation to the financial statements. We did not have any disagreements with management or any scope limitations in completing our audit. As far as we are aware, the state did not seek out other auditors' opinions on the application of generally accepted accounting principles. We did not have any major issues that we discussed prior to being retained as auditors for the state. We received full cooperation from the state with management all the way down to staff, really at every level in completing our audit. We are required to confirm that we are independent accountants with respect to the state under all relevant professional and regulatory guidelines. We did not identify actual or suspected fraud involving management or any employees that were in significant positions of internal control, and no fraud resulted in a material misstatement in the financial statements. We did not identify material non-compliance with laws and regulations. And then lastly, in addition to the CCO liability we just talked about, we did identify 2 other audit differences that weren't corrected in the annual financial statements. All of these audit differences individually in the aggregate did not preclude us from providing an unmodified opinion. But the second one was in the prior year, there was about $36.5 million of personal protective equipment that was recorded in the Coronavirus Relief Fund. In 21, that was deemed to be reimbursable by FEMA. So for us to kind of analyze that transaction being in a different period, we proposed an entry to push those expenses back to the general fund, just so we could analyze the effect on the beginning equity. And then the second one was a reversal of the unemployment fund receivables that were booked in contemplation of CARES fund transfer that really wasn't recognizable as of June 30th, 21. And that was approximately $10 million. And those are the required communications that we need to go through. If there's any questions with that.
I would just say that if anybody has any handle on CARES funds, ARPA funds, who else funds, thank you.
Yeah. I would, if it's all right, I would just like to add that I want to thank my staff, obviously, and KPMG for another successful audit, 100% remote, again, for the second time ever. My staff's in the office, but KPMG folks are remote, so it was another smooth audit, and as well, thank LBA for their help, because they provide a lot of the staffing assistance. So we work well together as a team. I can take a few minutes to highlight a few things in the book if you'd like. If there's interest. Just a couple? Okay.
Just a couple.
Just a couple.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
The
Again, it's a 160-page book. There's a lot of work involved, but I'll bring up a couple of the areas we tend to discuss the most. Is page 8 is where you'll find the general and education trust fund surplus statements. That is not an audit document, so that's purely on Commissioner and I to prepare, but it does align with our audited financial statements. So you will see that it reflects a very healthy year in unrestricted revenue and a very healthy rainy day fund balance that is now up to $257.8 million. So that is where we ended the year. That means because it's the end of the biennium, the general fund does not carry over any unrestricted, undesignated fund surplus. That is now all in the rainy day fund per statute. So we start anew going into FY22, but halfway through the year, we're already in good shape. So, and then if there are no questions on that, I would turn you to page 28 and 29 is our primary financial statement where you see the items that Commissioner Arlinghouse discussed in terms of OPEB, pension, debt, all of our long-term, this is our balance sheet. This is our long-term assets and liabilities. Nothing really has changed since last year, so that's good news. And then lastly, I would turn you to the general fund statements, which is on page 33. General education, highway, and the coronavirus relief fund are reflected here, and their fund balances are here, which is similar to what you would see in the surplus statement. But this is GAAP-based. And one thing I would point out, the coronavirus relief fund, we typically don't put federal funds into their own column. Federal funds, which we've received, for years and will continue to receive for years, run its course through the general fund. But when the coronavirus relief fund came along, the $1.25 billion that the state received, we thought it was warranted to be highlighted. Unbeknownst to us, we've now continued to receive the same level of funding in terms of the ARPA funds. So this column will have an end life to it, and then we will continue our past practice of having the federal funds shown through the general fund reporting. But that will be, there's a variety of other places where ARPA funds are reported, including our transparency website. So we'll be talking about that more in the next audit. So those are the highlights.
Yes, Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It seems like it's been 2 years, maybe it's been 3, but Ways and Means used to have somebody from the state, a very senior guy. He's retired and been replaced. But one of the things he would talk to Ways and Means about is how the financial analysts were viewing New Hampshire's books, and particularly the rainy day fund, and how that could potentially influence our bond rating. And so has this $257 million rainy day fund, has that had any influence with the analysts to either raise or maintain our bond rating? And remind us what the bond rating is.
I couldn't, well, actually, I probably could find it in there, but our Department of Treasury, so Monica Mezzapelli is in charge of the bond issuances, and what I can tell you is that we are issuing, starting that process this month. So in the next couple of months, they'll be issuing bonds and going through the rating agency process. So stay tuned, I guess, is the short answer, because we will find out if that had any implication on our current bond rating, which I think is I'll let that. I'll get that number, but I'll let Charlie. It's in the
Each agency has a different rating system. Our bond rating is not the absolute highest, but it's close. It's not been lowered in a long time. It was lowered at one time because the rainy day fund went through significant depletion. The state's balances in general in a period running through the last recession. The rainy day fund has never, ever been this high, and that will lead to very good things for the bond rating. I don't want to predict, and I don't think Monica would predict, that they will go up, but bond rating agencies will go, ooh, that's great, or words to that effect. Yeah. It's hard not to. It's astonishingly, I'm going to look at Senator D'Alessandro, and he doesn't even remember it being this high, ever.
Yeah. And, oh, by the way, we're making giant progress in 2022, FY 2022.
Thank you to Steve. He found it on page 26. It's a double A plus for Fitch, AA1 for Moody's, and double A for S&P.
Representative Emmerich.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. When you talked about the ARPA funds, and there's another one called the Governor's Office of Emergency Relief and Recovery. Is that under this umbrella, or is that being accounted for somewhere else?
So the governor's office, the Gopher office, is reflected, they're managing the funds in the coronavirus relief fund column. So the original 1.25 billion that we received is being managed by that group, and that is winding down. So as of the end of calendar 21, we were supposed to have encumbered all of that funding. So it'll take us some time to trickle out. All of the other funding that's why it's different in that at the time we were working under emergency orders. So the funding and the acceptance of the funds and the spending of the fund was going through an entirely different process. The ARPA funds are all going through this process. So anything that's being added to the budget is coming through the normal mechanism, which is you folks. And that is all going to be accounted for within the agencies that received the fund. So if Health and Human Services receives that federal grant, it comes through their portion of the general fund. If Environmental Services receives funding, it comes through their portion of the general fund. So it will be reflected. It will just make our base numbers that much higher. But it's not, some of it may be managed by the Gopher office, but it will still fall in line with whatever category of government is spending those funds.
Commissioner, did you want to add anything?
No.
Senator Guida, did you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In that we're discussing ARPA and CARES Act funds and such, I would like to seek support from this body to require Gopher to report to the Fiscal Committee in the aggregate and specifically how much money has been received, how much money has been granted, and how much money has been spent, both for CARES and ARPA. There's a lot of money. A lot of it is going out fast in places and so forth. I think it would help me, and I would hope that some other member of the committee would second my motion to ask Gopher to provide such an analysis. And so with the permission of the chair, I'll move that Gopher be required to present to the Fiscal Committee a spreadsheet detailing the expenditure of funds for CARES Act and ARPA Act revenues to the state.
Is there a second?
I would second that.
Okay, Senator D'Alessandro. Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet. Let me just ask this question. I know you said a spreadsheet, but would it be helpful if they actually came and spoke? So would you mind amending your motion?
So to request Gopher to come before the Fiscal Committee to explain in detail how much has been received, how much has been appropriated, and how much has been expended for the CARES Act and ARPA Act revenues received by the state.
Will. Okay. All right, thank you. Is there any discussion?
I have a question.
Just a moment.
Okay.
Representative Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Guida, are you aware, is the executive branch already required to provide us with that information, or because this happened under the state of emergency, it still remains us asking instead of us expecting?
Constitutionally, they're required to get the approval of the legislature by act or resolve before dispensing any funds, okay? That was violated, okay? I haven't seen any comprehensive report on receipt, expenditure, appropriation, and so forth. And I'm not aware, because the process completely circumvented.
Under CARES.
Right, thank you. The normal process, the constitutional process of accepting and then expending revenues. I'm not aware of any such, such
Yeah,
report.
before we continue this discussion, thank you all for coming, and thank you for the great report, okay? I mean, it's a lot of work on the part of DAS, and of course, we love it when we receive a, what was it called? Audit excellence?
Clean opinion is the generic term we use.
Oh, no, the certificate that.
Yes, we submit the financial statements to the GFOA for an award every year, and we did receive it again.
Yes, and that's very good. So I thank you all. If you'd like to continue or listen to our discussion, you're more than welcome to stay, but probably not.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt that, but I thought we should get back to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I heard the answer to be that it's not clear whether we should be expecting it or whether we're just asking for it.
Correct.
Is there any other discussion? Yes.
Does the change in motion preclude the presenters from having available an electronic or paper copy of the information that Senator Guida has asked for? Because that's what I heard in the original motion, was that we would have some sort of document that we'd be used to referral. That now has been changed to a verbal, but I would like to also ensure that there was something electronic or in paper that we'd be able to refer to going forward.
My goal was just simply to enhance the motion, to add a presentation. It was not to eliminate the spreadsheet.
And so, safe to say, by consensus of the body, that a spreadsheet will be provided in addition to a presentation.
Correct.
As part of that motion.
Yes.
And would it be electronic?
Well, more than likely.
It can be both, but electronic at least?
That's because you have your little computer sitting there, which is totally against the rules. Okay?
This isn't a public hearing.
Oh. Okay. Is there any other discussion? Michael, do you have a feel for what is going on with CARES and ARPA?
I do. So I know that Gopher has a lot of information on their website. The problem, it's not in a summary format that I believe would be very helpful for the legislature. So for instance, CARES, you have 1.25. They have a high-level summary by program type of where it went, but how much has been expended, how much, I think that's something the committee has, so we can relay that to the commissioner. As far as ARP funds are involved, they did put out a new report, Gopher, on their website. I just noticed it today. Just kind of breakdown of all the fiscal approvals of the ARPA. There's about $958 million of flex funds, lack for a better term. About $400 million has been spent, and they have it down to a certain category level. I'll send that to the committee. Obviously, I don't believe Gopher would be ready to go for your January 21st meeting, plus I think you have your binders in your office right now. But I will send you kind of what they have now and wait for feedback from you, and then communicate this with Taylor and Taylor Caswell and Gopher to get a report that's going to be helpful, so you can see where that money went. I know they keep track of it. There's so much money coming in, I think you have to keep track of it, it's audited. It's just the reporting part of it. And so I'll pull together some links from Gopher that I think may get you closer to where you want to go, and then I'll wait for your feedback, and I'll include everyone and share that with Taylor Caswell. So you get a report and a presentation of what you're looking for. I think there's a lot of information. Sometimes it's too much information. Nothing against Gopher, but if you go to the Gopher site, the time that you have to spend on that, we'll try to minimize.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any more discussion? Seeing none, do I have to do a roll call? No, okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? None. Motion carries 10-0. Okay, I know it says we have to schedule our next fiscal meeting. We've done that already. It's next Friday at 10 o'clock. And as was just reported for the House, our books are out here,
Yes.
and the Senate books are
In their offices.
in their offices. Oh, what a nice service.
It is, it's marvelous, really. I think we're overserved.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful.
I've heard as many people taking care of me as there are available.
I totally agree. All right, so in that case, thank you all for coming, and I have a motion to adjourn. Senator D'Alessandro, and Senator Guida seconds. All those in favor?
All right.
Opposed? I guess I'll just sit here by myself. Thank you.
There's a song for that.
Discussion, so.
Yeah.
I knew this was just going to be very high level, which is, everybody got